When looking at the presidencies of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, it's interesting and worthwhile to recognize that they were both greatly influenced by other 20th century presidents. This is particularly important when preparing for the AP exam because so many of the essay questions ask about these types of relationships. When Carter ran for the presidency in 1976, Americans had gone through a particularly difficult 13 years, starting with the assassination of JFK through the credibility gap created by LBJ in the Vietnam War, the disclosure of the horrible truths of the 1960s, like My Lai and the brutal assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Bobby Kennedy. All of these incidents encouraged the loss of American idealism and the distrust of government, especially in Washington. In many ways, Jimmy Carter, a man who literally taught Sunday school, if nothing else, seemed an honest Washington outsider who could be trusted to do the moral thing. In the end, what appealed to the electorate, Carter's lack of Washington experience, hurt him in practice, and he struggled with many issues throughout his one-term presidency. Many of Carter's greatest struggles were sown during the Eisenhower administration, especially when dealing with the Middle East. It's interesting that Eisenhower was incredibly popular, while Carter struggles even today in the court of public opinion. After the Ayatollah Khomeini led a revolution against the Shah, who had been put into power through a CIA coup led during the Eisenhower administration, 52 American hostages were taken and held for 444 days by this new anti-American government in Iran. As time went on, Carter faced increased pressure and scrutiny to find a way to release the hostages. A failed rescue attempt in which American helicopters crashed in the desert caused many to look at Carter as incompetent. Unknown to many Americans, Carter would work tirelessly towards the end of his presidency to secure the hostages' release. OPEC, which started at the end of the Eisenhower administration, and in some ways was originally a reaction to the Eisenhower Doctrine, would become a headache for Carter. For decades, Americans had benefited from inexpensive oil. OPEC's ability to limit production caused gas prices to skyrocket. Americans were forced to wait on long gas lines. There was a dramatic increase in inflation and unemployment, and whether it was deserved or not, Carter was blamed. Carter attempted to pass laws that would have changed much of our energy policy, but he didn't have the political skill to get his legislation passed, and some have described his personal affect as being in a malaise or depressed. Carter's greatest successes came as a peacemaker. He was able to negotiate a treaty between Israel and Egypt at the Camp David Accords, ending decades of war and hostility. He was also able to negotiate the SALT II agreement, limiting the production of nuclear weapons. Carter is defeated in 1980 by Ronald Reagan, exactly 20 years after Kennedy. The youngest elected president who is known for his vitality and optimism, Reagan becomes America's oldest elected president, and he too is known for his optimism and vitality. Carter has become one of America's most successful former presidents. Not interested in idling away his retirement playing golf, he has helped to resolve numerous international disputes, winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in 2002, as well as helping to create a habitat for humanity. Despite this legacy, many still consider Carter's presidency a failure. Ronald Reagan ran on a slogan that it was morning again in America. The optimistic and patriotic tone of his candidacy was in a direct contrast to the perceived malaise of Carter. In 1980, Reagan wins a landslide election and begins what some have called a conservative revolution. Reagan cut taxes and social programs. He called his economic policy supply-side economics. While critics believed he was recycling trickle-down economics, most people just called it Reaganomics. Although Reagan cut programs, he raised defense spending, most notably on a defense system named after the popular movie Star Wars. The cutting of taxes and increased spending led to deficits that still some criticize today. Like Kennedy before him, Reagan is best known for his foreign policy. After 40 years of following a policy of containment, Reagan will play a crucial role in helping to end the Cold War. In another striking similarity with Kennedy, Reagan travels to Berlin and delivers his famous "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall" speech. Kennedy, of course, gave his "Ich in ein Berliner" speech a generation before. Reagan's tough rhetoric did not end there. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire and increased defense spending. Many attribute the Soviet Union's inability to compete with this escalation as a major cause for the breakup of the Soviet Union. Although Reagan was wildly popular, his presidency was not without controversy, scandals, and even an assassination attempt. Another eerie similarity to Kennedy, Reagan was the target of a crazed assassin. Reagan, of course, survived the attack, and even in the operating room, Reagan displayed his wit and charm, joking with the doctors before being given anesthesia that he hoped they were all Republicans. Reagan displayed his pro-business supply-side model when he exercised the Taft-Hartley Act in firing the air traffic controllers after they went on strike. Reagan's biggest scandal, however, was something known as the Iran-Contra affair. He was accused of selling weapons to Iran and giving the money to the Contras. Both actions were illegal. In the end, a colonel by the name of Oliver North took the blame for the illegality, but to this day, it's a controversial topic, and some believe that Reagan deserved more blame than he received. Reagan is one of America's greatest 20th century presidents, and as such, he remains a polarizing figure in modern politics. Both Democrats and Republicans attempt to lay claim to his legacy. Often his policies and programs are distorted for political motivation. In short, Reagan inspired the nation. He's known as the great communicator, known for his optimism and patriotic speeches. His strong stance against the Soviet Union played a major role in ending the Cold War. His economic record is mixed and remains at the center of public debate today. While some say that Reaganomics pulled us out of the stagflation, as it was later called, of the 1970s, others argue that he began a policy of ever-increasing debt and deficit. There is no doubt that Reagan's presidency will continue to have a major impact on our political culture and climate. I hope this little show on Reagan and Carter helps you guys. It's a good summary of these two presidents, and when we're talking about the AP rarely asks too much about them. If there's an essay question, as I've kind of alluded to, I would imagine that that question would be something comparing them, say Reagan to Kennedy, or Carter and Eisenhower, or any other presidents during that time period. They certainly have a lot of similarities with many of them.